The stale scent of old liquor and ambition clung to the heavy velvet curtains of the Onyx Club. It was a thick, cloying smell, a mixture of cheap perfume, stale cigar smoke, and the faint metallic tang of desperation. Vincent Moretti watched the hazy room from his secluded corner booth, a place where shadows stretched long and deep. He preferred the quiet vantage point, where he could observe the intricate dance of human desires without being entirely seen himself. A low hum of conversation, a murmur of secrets and whispers, wove through the air, punctuated by the sharp, delicate clink of glasses. It barely registered against the hypnotic, low thrum of the house band, a mournful saxophone weaving through a slow, bluesy melody. He ran a finger over the smooth, cool rim of his tumbler, feeling the condensation gather on his skin. Ice cubes slowly dissolved within the amber liquid, tiny cracks appearing in their frozen hearts. His dark, discerning eyes, keen and unblinking, scanned the faces around the room. He noted the exaggerated gestures of a salesman, the furtive glances of a nervous gambler, the easy practiced smiles of women exchanging money for fleeting company. Nothing escaped his attention, every detail a piece of a larger, often predictable, puzzle. He had built his world on such observations. Then his gaze drifted, drawn instinctively toward the stage, to the single powerful spotlight that cut through the smoky haze. A figure emerged from the deeper shadows, slender and graceful, moving with a practiced elegance that silenced a dozen conversations and drew every eye, even the most jaded. This was Alara Vance, the dancer, the unspoken centerpiece of the club's fleeting manufactured magic. Her dark hair, a shimmering cascade of midnight silk, flowed around her as she began to move, a living current against the heavy, oppressive air. Each strand seemed to catch the light, creating a halo around her. The music shifted, the bluesy saxophone giving way to the sharp, passionate lament of a Spanish guitar, a rhythm that spoke of distant shores and broken hearts. Elara's body became a vessel for its sorrow, her movements translating the melody into tangible grief. Her arms arced, a slow, deliberate sweep that spoke of longing and release. Her feet glided across the polished wood, each step precise, each turn imbued with a fragile strength that seemed barely contained. She wore a costume of deep emerald, a striking, jewel-toned contrast to the muted, earthy tones of the club's decor. The fabric shimmered, catching the light as she spun, a flash of green against the dimness. Vinny watched her, a connoisseur of human nature, accustomed to seeing through even the most elaborate facades. He noted the perfect, almost unnatural arch of her back, the effortless, liquid extension of her limbs, the disciplined control over every muscle. Her performance was captivating, a masterclass in controlled artistry, a testament to countless hours of dedicated, solitary practice. Yet something else resonated, a dissonant note beneath the flawless melody of her dance, a whisper he almost missed. His attention focused, zeroing in on her eyes, those striking emerald pools that were supposed to sparkle with the joy of movement, reflecting the vibrant energy of her dance. Instead, they held a shadow, a deep, persistent sadness that no stage light, however bright, could entirely disguise. It was a familiar look, one he had seen in many places, in countless faces, but rarely so carefully, so meticulously concealed beneath such beauty. Her lips were curved into a faint, professional smile, a mask expertly applied for the audience, a public offering of charm. But her eyes told a different story entirely, a narrative of burdens carried alone, of silent struggles and unvoiced fears. He saw the subtle tension in her jaw, a faint clenching that betrayed a hidden strain. Her shoulders, despite their graceful dip and fluid motion, seemed to bear an invisible weight, a heavy cloak no one else could see. The air around her, thick with cheap perfume, and the desperate, grasping aspirations of the club's patrons seemed to press in, yet she moved through it with an ethereal detachment, as if she existed in a world entirely separate from theirs. Vinny knew the look of desperation intimately, understood its many insidious forms. He had carved an empire from understanding human weakness and strength, manipulating both with a cold, precise hand. Alara's performance, in its raw beauty and hidden pain, was a testament to both. He took another slow sip of his drink, the cool liquid a sharp, almost shocking counterpoint to the unexpected warmth that stirred within him, a strange, unfamiliar sensation in his chest. He rarely allowed such intrusions. His world demanded a cold, pragmatic logic, a detachment so absolute it ensured his survival and dominance. Yet Alara's dance, infused with that unspoken sorrow, pierced through his usual defenses, a vulnerability he rarely encountered. Her movements were not just steps, not merely choreographed gestures. They were pleas, silent whispers of a story she could not voice aloud. He could almost hear the ache in her heart, echoing in the gentle, almost hesitant sway of her hips, the deliberate, almost reluctant placement of her feet. The music swelled, a crescendo of longing, a sudden rush of sound that seemed to fill the very air with a raw, emotional plea. For a brief, fleeting moment, her gaze swept across the room, empty and searching, a flicker of profound vulnerability, before settling back into its studied intensity, the mask once more firmly in place. Her emerald eyes, even from this considerable distance, seemed to hold a vast, unplumbed depth of feeling, like dark, still pools reflecting an endless sky. They were not merely beautiful. They were windows into a soul trapped in a gilded cage, shimmering and alluring on the outside but confining within. Vinny recognized the signs, the subtle tells that most people, caught up in the spectacle, completely missed. He saw the slight tremor in her hand as she reached for a delicate fan, a barely perceptible wobble in her fingers. He noticed the brief flicker of apprehension when a particularly rowdy patron, emboldened by alcohol, called out a coarse remark from a nearby table. He understood the art of concealment, of presenting one flawless face to the world while holding another, a true vulnerable one in secret. He had perfected that art himself over many brutal years, honing it into a weapon and a shield. This girl, barely out of girlhood by the looks of her, had already learned it too, out of sheer inescapable necessity. He considered the sharp contrast, the opulent surroundings of the club, the shimmering crystal glasses filled with expensive, clinking drinks, the carefully constructed illusion of glamour. All of it served as a glittering backdrop for a quiet, profound suffering that pulsed beneath the surface. The club, with its false promises of escape and transient pleasure, was in fact a gilded prison for her, its walls adorned with velvet and lies. Her dance, so free and expressive in its form, was her only means of survival, her sole currency in this harsh world, and ironically, her chains. Vinny's own world was full of such stark paradoxes, but they usually involved power, vast sums of money, and the thorny complexities of loyalty, not the fragile, desperate existence of a young dancer. He watched as her routine neared its inevitable end, the music softening, fading into a gentle, almost melancholic echo. Her movement slowed, becoming more deliberate, drawing out the final moments. A final poignant pose was held for a long, silent moment, a tableau of quiet despair, before the thunderous applause broke the fragile spell. The sudden sound of clapping hands was a rude awakening, a harsh, jarring return to a reality he had momentarily forgotten. Alara took a shallow bow, her professional smile still in place, though her eyes remained shadowed, giving nothing away. She moved with a practiced grace, a seamless transition, off the stage, disappearing into the darker wings, swallowed by the velvet drapes. The powerful spotlight died, plunging the stage into momentary absolute gloom, before the house lights flickered back to their usual dim, unforgiving glow. Vinny's gaze lingered on the empty space where she had been, a vacant spot that still seemed to hold her presence. The impression she left was not of a performer, but of a spirit yearning for release, a bird beating its wings against unseen bars. He had seen fear in 1,000 forms, in the eyes of rivals cornered, in the trembling hands of debtors, in the guarded, wary expressions of his own men. But Alara's fear was different. It was deep, intrinsic, woven into the very fabric of her being, a constant low thrum of terror hidden beneath layers of practiced elegance and forced smiles. He rarely felt anything beyond a calculated interest in others, a cold, clinical assessment of their utility or their potential threat. Compassion was a dangerous luxury he could not afford, a weakness in his brutal world, a chink in the armor he had meticulously forged. Yet, as he considered Alara, a strange, unsettling sensation stirred within him, a recognition that was both immediate and profoundly disturbing. It was not pity, not exactly. It was more like an echo, a reflection of a raw, primal vulnerability he had long buried, a memory of being cornered, of facing overwhelming odds with only his wits to guide him. He saw in her not just a dancer, but a creature trapped, and in that trap he felt an unusual, almost unsettling flicker of recognition in Alara's hidden fear, a feeling he rarely, if ever, experienced. The spotlight faded, leaving Alara in a sudden, isolating darkness. Her heart still pounded from the effort of her dance, a frantic drum against her ribs. The applause felt thin, a distant echo swallowed by the heavy velvet drapes in the suffocating air of the Onyx Club. She felt the familiar exhaustion settle deep in her bones, a weariness that went far beyond tired muscles. Every graceful movement she offered on stage demanded a piece of her spirit, slowly chipping away at her resolve. She walked off the stage, her practiced smile dissolving into a blankness as soon as she was out of sight. The narrow corridor backstage was a stark contrast to the glittering stage, smelling of stale beer, dust, and something vaguely metallic. Here, the illusion of beauty dissolved completely, replaced by the grim reality of her life. She peeled off her elaborate costume, the heavy fabric and sequins feeling like a second skin she desperately wanted to shed. The mirror in her small dressing room showed not the captivating dancer, but a young woman with shadows under her emerald eyes. Her reflection seemed to ask how much longer she could keep this up, how many more nights she could pretend to be free. She pulled on her own clothes, a simple worn dress that offered no comfort from the chill in the air or the chill in her heart. Her fingers, still trembling slightly, found the cool metal of the locket nestled against her skin. It was a small, tarnished silver piece, always there, a silent anchor in a turbulent sea. She often held it, feeling the faint imprint of her mother's face within its clasp, a ghost of a touch from a life long gone. A sudden sharp knock on her door startled her, making her flinch. It could only be one person. Her stomach tightened, a knot of dread forming instantly. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing pulse before opening the door. Marcus Thorne stood there, his presence filling the cramped space with an oppressive weight. His slicked-back hair gleamed under the bare bulb, and his eyes, small and calculating, raked over her. The expensive, ill-fitting suit he wore seemed to strain across his heavy frame, a testament to his indulgence. The cloying scent of his cheap cologne mixed with the faint smell of whiskey on his breath. "Another fine performance, Alara," he slurred, a smirk twisting his lips. His words were never praise, only a precursor to demands. "The customers enjoyed it. They always enjoy you." Alara said nothing, simply nodding, her gaze fixed on a point just past his shoulder. She could not meet his eyes. To do so felt like acknowledging his ownership, giving him more power than he already possessed. He stepped further into the room, making her instinctively retreat. The small space suddenly felt suffocatingly small. "But enjoyment does not pay the bills, does it, my dear?" he continued, his voice losing its forced pleasantness. "The tab keeps running. Your debt, Alara. It is a persistent thing, like a shadow you cannot outrun." He pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket, waving it vaguely in front of her. It was a ledger, constantly updated, constantly growing. The numbers on it were astronomical, a mountain she knew she could never climb. Her mind reeled, trying to grasp the sheer impossibility of it all. Each shift, each dance, each forced smile, it all seemed to add only a fraction, while the principle somehow always grew larger. It was a cage of his own making, reinforced by every passing day. The very air she breathed felt like it belonged to him. "You need to work harder," Marcus stated, his voice now flat and cold. "Push yourself, get more from them. They will give it to you if you are persuasive enough." His meaning hung in the air, a vile suggestion she refused to acknowledge. A wave of nausea washed over her. She knew what he implied, what he sometimes demanded. Her body felt cold, even in the stuffy room. The locket felt heavier against her chest, a small cold stone in a rising tide of despair. She wanted to scream, to rail against the injustice, but the words caught in her throat. There was no point. Her voice held no power here. Her defiance would only make things worse. I am working, she managed to whisper, her voice thin and reedy. Every night, I give everything. Marcus let out a short, dismissive laugh. Everything? I think not. There is always more, Ilara. Always more to give, especially when you owe so much. He took another step closer, his eyes narrowing. Do you understand? The money. Where is it? I need more. Now. He watched her, waiting for a response, a sign of her breaking. She wished she could disappear, become invisible, melt into the dingy wall behind her. The pressure was a physical weight on her shoulders, pushing her down. She could feel the last remnants of her spirit fraying at the edges. The thought of finding more money was a cruel joke. Every spare coin she earned went straight into Marcus's greedy hands, swallowed by the bottomless pit of her debt. There was nothing left to give. No hidden stash, no generous benefactor. She was utterly alone. Suddenly, a gruff voice from outside the door interrupted their tense exchange. Marcus, you got a minute? We need to talk. Marcus grunted, clearly annoyed by the interruption, but the shift in his demeanor was immediate. He gave Ilara one last, lingering look that promised retribution, then turned to leave. We are not finished here, Ilara, he warned, his voice low and menacing. Remember that. He stepped out, leaving the door ajar, and Ilara quickly moved to close it, but hesitated. She heard his voice, lower now, speaking with someone else. Curiosity, mixed with a deep-seated fear, kept her hand from the doorframe. She pressed her ear to the crack, straining to hear over the distant thrum of the club's music. Her breath hitched in her throat as she recognized the other voice. It belonged to a man named Silas, known for his unsavory connections, his dealings far darker than even Marcus's usual fare. She is a good earner, Marcus, Silas said, his voice raspy. You have kept her under wraps well. Ilara's blood ran cold. They were talking about her. Her stomach churned. The casual, almost clinical way they discussed her sent a shiver of pure terror down her spine. She felt like a piece of merchandise, an object to be appraised and traded. She has her uses, Marcus replied, his tone guarded. But she is becoming difficult. Her debt is a problem, Silas. A large, inconvenient problem. A problem that can be solved, Silas chuckled, the sound devoid of humor. Everything has a price, Marcus, even a dancer with pretty eyes and a broken spirit. Ilara's fingers locked around the locket, clutching it so tightly her knuckles turned white. The metallic taste of fear filled her mouth. A transaction. A trade. She had always been aware of her precarious position, the thin line she walked, but this felt different. This felt like the end of the line, a final, horrifying step. She closed her eyes, trying to block out their words, but they pierced through her, each syllable a barb. The girl is worth more than the club's take if you play it right, Silas continued. I have heard whispers. There are others who would pay handsomely for her particular talents. His voice dropped, becoming a low murmur, especially for someone with her unique history. Ilara felt a cold sweat break out on her forehead. Unique history. What could that mean? The pieces began to click into place, forming a terrifying mosaic. Her past, her family's desperate circumstances, the reason she fell into debt in the first place, all of it could be exploited. This was not just about the club's meager earnings anymore. This was about something far more sinister, a fate she could barely imagine. Her limbs felt heavy, her muscles stiff with terror. She wanted to run, to scream, to disappear. Marcus cleared his throat. Her debt is substantial, and she needs to be managed. She has proven to be a flight risk in the past. Management is my specialty, Marcus, Silas said, his voice now a low purr, like a predator circling its prey. And my associates are very good at ensuring cooperation. She would be eager to please. The right kind of client would appreciate her. No doubt. Ilara pressed her hand to her mouth, stifling a gasp. Her eyes burned with unshed tears. Eager to please. The implication was unmistakable, sickening. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. This was not just about dancing, not just about paying off an impossible debt. This was about being sold, truly sold, to someone far worse than Marcus. Her mind raced, desperate for an escape. Any escape, but there was nowhere to go. She was trapped, utterly and completely. The conversation outside continued, a low drone of voices that made her skin crawl. She could not make out every word, but the tone, the casual disregard for her humanity, was crystal clear. She was a commodity, a piece of property, nothing more. A wave of profound loneliness washed over her, a desolate understanding that she was truly on her own. There was no one to help her, no one to fight for her. She had been foolish to even hope. Eventually, Silas's footsteps receded. Marcus re-entered the dressing room, his face hardened, his eyes cold and devoid of any semblance of humanity. Alara quickly moved away from the door, pretending to be organizing her few belongings. She could feel his gaze on her, assessing, calculating. He knew she had overheard something. The air crackled with unspoken menace. "Listen to me, Alara," Marcus said, his voice low and dangerous, a stark contrast to his earlier bluster. There was a new edge to it, a chilling finality. "Your debt, it is reaching a critical point. My patience, it is wearing thin, very thin." He leaned closer, invading her personal space, making her shrink back against the wall. The smell of his cologne was overpowering, making her feel faint. His eyes were like chips of ice. "I have options, you understand," he continued, his voice a menacing whisper. "Other ways to resolve your situation. Ways you would not enjoy, not at all." He paused, letting his words sink in, watching the fear bloom in her eyes. "You have until the end of the week, 7 days, to bring me a significant portion of what you owe. A large portion, or else." His gaze bore into her, holding her captive. "If you fail," he said, the words cutting through the air like razor blades, "I will sell your debt. And you, Alara, will go with it, to someone far worse than me. Someone who will not be so understanding." He stared at her for another long, agonizing moment, then turned and walked out, leaving her alone in the suffocating silence. The door clicked shut behind him, but the sound echoed in her ears, a prison door clanging shut. The words hung in the air, a chilling prophecy. Someone far worse than me. The thought alone was enough to make her tremble, her entire body shaking uncontrollably. She sank to the floor, her legs no longer able to support her. The worn locket was still clutched in her hand, digging into her palm, a cold reminder of everything she had lost and everything she was about to lose. 7 days to find an impossible sum of money or face a fate she could not even comprehend. The walls of her small room felt like they were closing in, the air growing thin, and the darkness of her future stretched out before her, vast and terrifying. The quiet hum of the night outside his study window did little to soothe the tension in Vincent Moretti's shoulders. He had felt it, that subtle shift in his gut, the moment he left the Onyx Club. An unusual flicker of recognition, a sense that something was deeply amiss with the dancer, Alara Vance. It was not a feeling he often entertained, nor one he ignored. His eyes, usually cool and remote, held a distant calculation. The club's stale air still seemed to cling to his expensive suit, a phantom reminder of the desperation he had sensed beneath the flashing lights. Without a word, a mere glance at the door, he had summoned Frank. Frank, his shadow, his right hand, understood the silent command. Information was the currency of their world, and Vinny always paid in full. He wanted everything: Alara Vance, Marcus Thorne, and the murky labyrinth connecting them both. Frank's movements were as precise and silent as a cat's. He would disappear into the city's underbelly, sift through its whispered secrets, and return with truths no one else dared to uncover. 3 days later, the report landed on Vinny's mahogany desk, a thick manila envelope holding more than just paper. It held lives, fates, and the raw threads of human desperation. The air in the study felt heavy, thick with the scent of aged leather and the cold metallic tang of ink. Vinny sat in his high-backed chair, the soft glow of a single desk lamp illuminating the stark white pages. The words seemed to jump out, each one a brushstroke, painting a picture far grimmer than the one he had glimpsed on stage. Alara Vance, her name was etched into the first page. Born into a modest life, an only child, Her mother a seamstress, her father a carpenter. A family history devoid of opulence, but rich in quiet struggle. Then the turning point, a sudden, devastating illness for her mother. The medical bills piled high, impossible sums for a family already living paycheck to paycheck. Vinny's gaze hardened as he read this detail. He knew how quickly a life could unravel when fate dealt a cruel hand, how quickly hope could curdle into despair. The report meticulously detailed her attempts to save her mother, working 2 jobs, selling family heirlooms, anything to stave off the inevitable. But the debt grew, a monstrous entity that swallowed everything. Her mother passed away, leaving Alara alone, not just with her grief, but with an inherited mountain of medical bills and funeral expenses. The weight of it, Vinny understood, would crush most people. He traced a finger along the line describing the first loan she took out, a small, desperate act that began her descent. Then came Marcus Thorne, the club owner, a shark in human skin, smelling the blood of vulnerability from a mile away. The report outlined how Marcus had offered Alara a solution to her financial woes, a job at the Onyx Club. Not just dancing, but a vague, insidious contract that bound her to him through an ever-increasing, impossible debt. The initial loan was small, but the interest rates were astronomical, the penalties merciless. Vinny read about fabricated charges, inflated living expenses, and phantom fines. It was a spider web designed to trap, to suffocate. Ilara's debt, the report stated, now stood at an astronomical sum, a figure so ludicrous it could only be a product of deliberate exploitation. It was not merely financial ruin, it was a form of modern slavery, a legal loophole used to shackle a young woman. Vinny's jaw tightened. He had seen similar tactics employed in other circles, though usually with more overt violence. This was a slow, psychological strangulation. Just as effective, perhaps even more so, because it played on hope, then eroded it completely. The report then shifted its focus to Marcus Thorne himself. The man was not just a greedy club owner. His hands, it turned out, were steeped in far darker dealings, loan sharking, illegal gambling operations, and a growing network of human trafficking. The last detail made Vinny pause, a cold knot forming in his stomach. The thought of Alara, her quiet despair, being caught in such a web, sent an unfamiliar ripple through him. He often dealt with men who operated in the shadows, but Marcus Thorne represented a particular kind of filth. Marcus's recent activities involved brokering arrangements for wealthy, depraved clients. He often used the club as a hunting ground, identifying vulnerable women, then leveraging their debts to force them into unspeakable situations. The report did not explicitly state Alara's involvement in these specific dealings, but the implications were clear. Marcus was preparing to sell Alara's debt not just to another moneylender, but to someone who saw her as a commodity, a living asset to be traded. This was the greater danger Marcus had threatened her with, the terrifying abyss waiting just beyond the edges of the Onyx Club. Vinny pushed away from his desk, the report still open, its pages mocking the quiet order of his study. He began to pace, his footsteps muffled by the thick Persian rug. The silence of the room was profound, broken only by the soft creak of his leather shoes and the distant, almost imperceptible hum of the city. He ran a hand through his impeccably groomed dark hair, a rare frown creasing his brow. This was not merely a business transaction, not just another case of a lowlife preying on the weak. This felt different. He had built his empire on a strict, personal code. Justice, in his world, was not found in courtrooms or legal documents. It was delivered, swift and unequivocal, by those with the power to enforce it. He recognized the brutal fairness of the underworld, where rules, however dark, were still rules. But Marcus Thorne operated without a code, without any semblance of honor. He was a parasite, feeding on the desperate, shattering lives without a second thought. Vinny detested that kind of weakness, that kind of depravity. He paused by the tall window, looking out at the city lights twinkling in the distance. The vast expanse of concrete and steel, a labyrinth of a million stories, a million injustices. He was a man accustomed to making difficult decisions, often violent ones. Yet Alara Vance's plight stirred something within him he rarely acknowledged. It was a quiet indignation, a slow-burning ember that now threatened to flare into a determined flame. Her eyes, filled with that haunting sadness, flashed in his mind. He remembered the fragile grace of her movements, the way she seemed to float above the ugliness of the club, a ghost of beauty in a desolate place. He considered the practicalities. Intervening in Marcus Thorne's affairs was simple enough. Marcus was a small-time operator, a loudmouth with delusions of grandeur. But the larger implication, the greater danger Marcus spoke of, that was a different matter. Who was Marcus indebted to? Who was this more powerful, more vengeful figure waiting in the wings to claim Alara? Frank's report had hinted at shadowy connections, names whispered in the city's darker corners. Vinny knew that disrupting one thread often unraveled an entire tapestry, but the alternative, leaving Alara to her fate, felt like a betrayal of his own rigid principles. His code demanded a certain kind of order, even in chaos. He would not stand by and watch a life be systematically destroyed by such a petty tyrant. It went against the very grain of his being, a silent affront to the carefully constructed justice he enforced. He thought of his own past, the moments of vulnerability, the times he had seen others crushed by forces beyond their control. A distant echo of empathy, a feeling he had long since buried under layers of steel and resolve, stirred within him. He turned from the window, his gaze sweeping over the polished wood, the leather-bound books, the expensive art adorning his walls. This sanctuary, this fortress, felt suddenly cold, sterile. The image of Alara, trapped and fearful, overshadowed the quiet luxury of his surroundings. He could not ignore it. He could not pretend he had not seen it. The unsettling flicker had become a certainty. The girl was a victim, pure and simple, and Marcus Thorne was her tormentor. A deep sigh escaped him, a rare concession to the weight of his thoughts. His hand reached for the report again, his fingers brushing against the cold paper. The facts were laid bare, undeniable. Alara Vance was a pawn in a game she never asked to play, destined for a fate far worse than the one she now endured. He saw the threads of her despair, the web of lies and debt Marcus had spun around her. He knew he could cut those threads. He knew he could dismantle that web. His eyes narrowed, hardening once more into their customary piercing intensity. The frown on his brow smoothed away, replaced by a look of cold, unwavering resolve. The decision was made silently, unequivocally. This woman's fate would not be left to Marcus Thorne. The heavy air of the Onyx Club, thick with the scent of cheap perfume and stale whiskey, pressed down on Alara Vance like a physical weight. Another night had descended, cold and unforgiving, wrapping around her in its suffocating embrace. Her body moved across the stage with an almost mechanical precision, each step a testament to years of disciplined training, each turn a practiced illusion of freedom. Yet, beneath the shimmering fabric of her costume, a profound weariness had settled deep into her bones, a dull ache that spoke of endless nights and a spirit slowly, relentlessly being crushed. Her emerald eyes, usually sparkling with life, now held a deep, unyielding shadow, reflecting the stark reality of her existence. They danced over the anonymous faces in the audience, a sea of blurred features, their laughter and chatter a distant, muffled roar in her ears. Her thoughts, however, were not on the rhythm of the music or the appreciative gazes of some patrons. They were caught, ensnared, by the chilling words Marcus Thorne had delivered just days before, a promise of a fate far worse than her current gilded cage. That ultimatum, cold and absolute, had stripped away the last vestiges of her fragile hope, leaving behind only a stark, bone-deep dread. A tremor ran through her, not from the chill of the air, but from the icy grip of fear around her heart. Her fingers, despite the graceful flow of her arm movements, unconsciously brushed against the hidden locket tucked beneath her costume, its tarnished silver a familiar comfort against her skin. It was the only piece of her past she still possessed, a tangible link to a mother whose memory was now a fading warmth against the encroaching cold. The faded photograph inside offered no solutions, no escape, only a silent echo of what she had lost. She moved in a trance, her mind a chaotic swirl of numbers, debts, and the terrifying image of unknown men. Men who Marcus had hinted at, men who saw her not as a dancer, but as a commodity, a ledger entry to be traded. The thought was a raw, exposed nerve, making her want to curl into herself and disappear. But the music drove her on, an insistent, demanding force compelling her to continue the performance, to maintain the illusion of beauty and grace, even as her soul screamed in silent protest. Her gaze, against her will, drifted to the VIP section, a shadowed alcove where power often resided. She had seen him there before, the quiet man, Vincent Moretti, his presence a stark, imposing silhouette against the club's murky backdrop. He was there again tonight. She sensed it more than saw it, a magnetic pull drawing her attention, a prickling awareness on her skin. His eyes, she imagined, were fixed on her, just as they had been on other nights, an unsettling, unreadable intensity that both unnerved and strangely captivated her. What did he see when he looked at her? A broken dancer? A commodity? Or something else entirely? The uncertainty was a new layer to her dread, adding another complex thread to the tapestry of her fear. His presence was a strange anomaly in her bleak world. He was not like the others, not the leering patrons, not the predatory Marcus. There was a quiet authority about him, an unspoken command that both frightened and, in a twisted way, offered a fleeting, dangerous sense of security. She hated herself for even considering such a thought, for finding any solace in the gaze of a man who undoubtedly moved in the same dark circles that had trapped her. Yet a part of her, a desperate, irrational part, yearned for someone, anyone to simply see her, not just the performance, not just the debt. The music reached its crescendo, a final sweeping flourish, and Alara sank into a deep bow, her chest heaving, the air suddenly feeling thin. She held the pose for a moment, gathering her strength, then slowly straightened, forcing a fragile smile to her lips. It was a mask she wore well, one she had perfected over countless nights. But tonight she felt it cracking, the strain of maintaining it almost unbearable. As she turned to exit the stage, a jarring sound cut through the lingering applause, a loud, booming voice that instantly shattered the fragile peace she had created. "Hey, little bird, don't fly off just yet." Ilara flinched, her shoulders tensing, her body rigid. She recognized the type instantly, a common fixture in clubs like the Onyx. Overgrown, overconfident, and overflowing with cheap liquor. She glanced towards the source of the voice, a man lumbering from a table near the stage, his movements clumsy and his face flushed an angry red. He was overweight, his suit straining at the seams, and his slicked back hair glinted unpleasantly under the stage lights. A thick gold chain, gaudy and ostentatious, rested against his sweaty neck. The smell of stale cologne and sour alcohol preceded him, a foul cloud drifting towards the stage. She tried to ignore him, her gaze fixed on the wings, willing herself to disappear backstage, to escape the immediate burgeoning threat. She had dealt with men like him countless times, had perfected the art of deflection, the cold, dismissive glance, the quick retreat. Her mind raced, calculating the quickest route, the nearest shadow. But this man, emboldened by drink and an apparent sense of entitlement, was different. He did not heed her silent dismissal. "I said, don't you dare walk away from me." His voice was a crude bellow, echoing through the sudden, uneasy quiet of the club. A few patrons shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some averted their eyes, others watched with a morbid curiosity. The music, which had just concluded, was replaced by a tense, uncomfortable silence, broken only by the man's escalating shouts. Ilara felt her stomach clench, a knot of icy fear tightening within her. This was the moment where her practiced indifference often failed, where the veneer of her composure threatened to shatter. She took another step toward the wings, her heart hammering against her ribs, a desperate drumbeat of warning. Perhaps if she just ignored him, he would tire or a bouncer would intervene. But her hope was a fleeting, fragile thing, easily crushed by the man's persistent, aggressive approach. He was closer now, his heavy footsteps thudding ominously on the floor, the vibration reaching her through the wooden stage. "You think you're too good for me, huh?" he sneered, his words slurred, thick with menace. "I've paid good money to see you dance, girl. The least you can do is show some respect." He waved a hand dismissively, almost knocking over a glass on a nearby table. Alara could feel the heat of his drunken breath from the edge of the stage, a sickening wave washing over her. Her entire body screamed at her to run, to flee, to find any sanctuary from his crude advances. Her eyes, weighted with a burgeoning terror, darted quickly to the VIP section again, a desperate, instinctual search. Vinnie Moretti was still there. She saw him clearly now, a dark, immovable silhouette in the shadows. His gaze, she felt it, was still on her, an unwavering intensity that offered no comfort, no reassurance, but simply watched. She wondered in a flash of irrational thought if he would do anything, if he even noticed her growing distress. But he remained still, a statue carved from shadow and stone, his face unreadable, his presence an enigma. The boorish customer now stood directly at the edge of the stage, his heavy hand reaching out, his fingers surprisingly quick despite his bulk. Alara gasped, a sharp choke sound, as his rough, meaty fingers clamped around her arm. The grip was immediate and brutal, a sudden, violating pressure that made her wince, her delicate skin feeling bruised already. Her eyes widened, her carefully constructed mask of composure crumbling in an instant, replaced by raw, unadulterated terror. "Let go of me," she managed, her voice a thin, reedy whisper, barely audible above the sudden uproar in her own ears. Her mind screamed, a cacophony of fear and desperation, but her voice felt trapped, small, and utterly powerless against the man's brute strength. The rough fabric of his suit scraped against her arm, a sickening sensation, and the smell of his sour breath filled her nostrils, making her stomach churn. She tried to pull away, to wrench her arm free, but his grip tightened further, an iron vice that refused to yield. The man merely laughed, a harsh, guttural sound that grated on her ears. "Oh, you're a feisty one, aren't you? I like that." His eyes, bloodshot and glazed with alcohol, devoured her, an unsettling, predatory gleam in their depths. The club, which had momentarily fallen silent, now buzzed with whispers and murmurs, a ripple of unease spreading through the crowd. No one moved to intervene, no bouncer stepped forward, leaving Alara utterly alone, exposed, and vulnerable under the harsh glare of the stage lights. Her breath hitched in her throat, a wave of nausea washing over her as he pulled, a sudden powerful yank that sent a searing pain through her arm. She stumbled, her balance lost, her body lurching forward, pulled inexorably towards him, towards the edge of the stage. The world tilted, a dizzying spin of light and shadow, and her heart hammered wildly, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Her silent scream, a desperate, unheard plea, was trapped in her throat, unable to escape, unable to shatter the terrifying silence that now enveloped her. The customer's hand, coarse and demanding, clamped onto Alara's arm, a sudden cruel pressure that threatened to drag her off balance. Her emerald eyes, wide with a terror that reached deep into her bones, locked onto the man's sneering face. She felt the heavy weight of his grip, a burning sensation spreading across her skin, and the silent scream she could not voice trapped itself in her throat. The music, a thumping, relentless rhythm, seemed to mock her helplessness, each beat echoing the frantic pounding of her own heart. The spotlights on the stage, usually a comforting shield, now felt like a harsh, exposing glare, pinning her in place for all to see her degradation. Then, a sudden shift in the air, a minute disturbance in the club's oppressive atmosphere. In the secluded VIP booth, Vincent Moretti had been a still, silent presence, a shadow observing shadows. Now, without a conscious thought, he moved. It was less a decision and more an inevitability. An internal line crossed the moment he saw the brutal, violating touch on Alara. His chair, heavy and upholstered in dark velvet, scraped barely a whisper against the plush carpet as he pushed off, the sound lost in the club's dull roar. It was a fluid, almost instantaneous motion, honed by years of quick reactions and sudden demands. One moment, he was a still figure, a dark silhouette in the dim light of his booth. In the next, he was a purposeful blur. He wove through the tightly packed tables with an uncanny grace, his body cutting a path through the throngs of patrons. Glasses clinked softly on nearby surfaces as people instinctively leaned away, sensing the sudden, powerful current in the room. A collective, unspoken gasp rippled through the immediate vicinity, a sudden awareness that something profound was about to happen. Yet no one dared to speak, their eyes, wide and startled, following his swift, deliberate progress. The air, thick with the cloying scent of cheap perfume and stale whiskey, seemed to part before him, an invisible wave pushing back the suffocating closeness of the club. He felt the soft, familiar give of the carpet beneath his impeccably polished leather shoes, the rhythmic thrum of the club's bass vibrating up through the floorboards and into his very bones. His gaze, sharp and unwavering, remained fixed on the struggling dancer, on the man whose crude hand still held her captive. Each step was precise, measured, covering the distance to the stage with an almost unsettling lack of sound, a silent predator closing in on its prey. Alara, lost in her own fear, felt the customer's grip loosen for a fleeting second, a fractional shift that offered no relief. Her eyes, still brimming with unshed tears, caught a glimpse of movement, a dark form approaching the stage with impossible speed. It was Vinny, the man who had watched her with such an intense, unreadable gaze all night. Before she could even process the image, he was there. He moved like a shadow, a sudden formidable presence manifesting out of the smoky haze. His hand shot out, not toward Alara, but toward the customer. Vinny seized the man's arm with a grip that felt like iron, a vice clamping down on bone and muscle. The customer, still leering at Alara, let out a shocked grunt, his eyes widening in bewildered surprise as his focus was violently wrenched away from his intended victim. There was no warning, no spoken word, only the swift, brutal efficiency of Vinny's action. Without a moment's hesitation, without so much as a flicker in his dark eyes, Vinny twisted the man's arm. The sound was not loud, but it was definite, a soft, sickening pop amidst the still thumping bass. A sharp, pained yelp tore from the customer's throat, raw and involuntary, cutting through the music's facade. His face contorted, a mask of drunken aggression dissolving into pure agony. The man's knees buckled underneath him as if he were a puppet whose strings had been abruptly severed. He collapsed to the floor with a heavy thud, a groaning heap of expensive fabric and cheap arrogance. The sudden violence, the stark reality of the man's pain, was a shock wave that silenced the surrounding patrons, their own conversations dying in their throats. Vinny stood over the groaning customer, his form imposing and unyielding. The man writhed on the sticky floor, clutching his arm, his previous bravado entirely gone, replaced by whimpers and desperate gasps for air. Vinny's presence radiated a cold, deadly calm, an aura of absolute control that seemed to suck the very oxygen from the air. The club's boisterous energy, its veneer of careless revelry, shattered into 1,000 pieces. The music, which minutes before had seemed so loud, now felt distant, a muffled beat against an unnatural, terrifying silence. Patrons froze mid-sip, their glasses half raised, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and fascination. Whispers, quick and sharp as shards of glass, broke out in isolated pockets, then died away under the weight of Vinny's silent authority. The air grew heavy, thick with unspoken questions and a palpable sense of dread. No one dared to approach, no one dared to intervene. They simply watched, their eyes darting between the formidable figure of Vinny and the crumpled, whimpering form on the floor. Alara, released from the customer's painful grasp, stumbled back a step, her arm throbbing with a dull ache. She clutched her hand to her chest, her breath catching in her throat, her body trembling uncontrollably. Her gaze was fixed on Vinny, this man who had emerged from the shadows to become her unexpected, terrifying savior. She felt a profound shock, a dizzying mix of relief and a new unsettling fear. The smell of cheap perfume and sweat now mingled with the metallic tang of fear in her own mouth. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She looked at Vinny's face, searching for an explanation, for any hint of emotion in his unyielding features. His dark eyes, usually so piercing, held an almost tranquil stillness, like the surface of a deep, dark lake. There was no anger there, no satisfaction, just a quiet, implacable resolve. He simply stood, a statue carved from granite, asserting his dominion over the suddenly cowed nightclub. The fallen customer continued to groan, a pathetic, broken sound that did little to disrupt the profound silence Vinny had imposed. It was clear that the man was no longer a threat, not to Alara, and certainly not to Vinny. The sudden hush in the main area of the club, however, did not extend to every corner. From the back, a rising murmur, a clamor of footsteps, signaled the approach of someone else. Marcus Thorne, alerted by the unusual commotion and the abrupt cessation of the club's usual noisy din, was pushing his way through the stunned crowd. His face was a thundercloud contorted in a furious, bewildered scowl. He pushed past startled waitresses and wide-eyed patrons, his heavy frame forcing a path, his anger a hot, visible steam radiating from him. He had expected to see a brawl, a drunken misunderstanding, perhaps even a security guard dragging out a troublemaker. Instead, his gaze, sweeping across the unnaturally silent room, landed on the still figures by the stage. His eyes narrowed, then widened in disbelief, his jaw dropping slightly as he recognized the man standing over the fallen customer. It was Vincent Moretti, standing there with an unnerving, absolute calm, a silent, powerful force in the middle of his club. Marcus's initial fury, hot and explosive, began to curdle into a cold, terrifying dread as he stared at the man whose presence promised far more than a simple bar fight. Marcus Thorne shoved his way through the stunned onlookers, his face a landscape of purple veins and righteous fury. The gold chain around his thick neck bounced with each agitated step. His heavy breathing carried the scent of stale whiskey and cheap cigars. He planted himself before Vinny, eyes bulging, hands balled into fists that looked ready to strike. The music had died, leaving only a low hum of machinery and the collective held breath of the club's patrons. "What in God's name do you think you're doing in my club?" Marcus bellowed, his voice cracking with indignation. "This is my establishment, my rules. You can't just come in here and lay hands on my customers." Vinny Moretti did not respond immediately. His dark eyes remained fixed on Alara, who stood just behind him, a fragile shadow against his unyielding presence. Her body still trembled, a faint shiver running through her slender frame. The lingering pain from the boorish customer's grip on her arm was a dull ache, but the fear in her emerald eyes was far sharper. She watched Vinny, a dizzying cocktail of terror and a strange, unfamiliar spark of awe swirling within her. She was not certain if he was a savior or merely another dangerous man, yet his proximity offered an unexpected, though terrifying way to shield. Marcus gestured wildly at the collapsed man groaning on the floor. "Look what you did. You broke his arm. This is going to cost me a fortune. Do you have any idea who that man is?" The scent of spilled alcohol and Alara's own nervous sweat filled her nostrils. Her hands, still shaking, instinctively went to the small, tarnished locket tucked beneath her costume, its familiar cold metal a tiny anchor in the swirling chaos. She could feel the vibrations of Vinny's steady breathing, the solid, unyielding warmth of his back against her front. It was a strange comfort, a dangerous proximity that made her heart pound against her ribs. She tasted the metallic tang of fear in her mouth. Vinny remained silent, his gaze unwavering, dissecting Alara. He saw the faint purple bruising already starting on her wrist, the almost imperceptible flinch when Marcus's voice rose, the way her fingers clutched at the locket. He noted the tear tracks that had momentarily stained her powdered cheek, now dry but visible under the harsh stage lights. Her fear was a raw, palpable thing, but beneath it, he perceived a stubborn, almost defiant spark. She was terrified, yes, but not entirely broken. This observation, so small yet so profound, solidified something within him. Marcus, emboldened by Vinny's silence, took a step closer, his face contorted into an ugly sneer. "I asked you a question, pal. You deaf? Or just too stupid to understand who runs things around here?" He puffed out his chest, trying to project an authority he clearly did not possess in this moment. The air grew thick with his indignation, clashing with the subtle, dangerous quiet emanating from Vinny. Alara's breath hitched. She instinctively recoiled, a silent plea forming in her mind for Marcus to stop. She understood the unspoken hierarchy of this world, the invisible lines one did not cross. Marcus, in his drunken bravado, was stepping over one such line, straight into an abyss. She felt a shiver of dread that had nothing to do with her own safety, but with the terrifying force Vinny represented. The entire club held its breath. The clinking of ice, the murmur of conversation, Everything had ceased. Every eye was fixed on the stage, on the three figures caught in the stark spotlight. The oppressive quiet amplified the sound of Marcus's heavy breathing and Alara's own frantic heartbeat. She could feel her pulse racing in her throat, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Her vision blurred at the edges, the bright lights of the club becoming halos around the figures in front of her. You think you can just waltz in here, cause a scene, and walk away, Marcus continued, his voice rising in pitch. He tried to grab Vinny's arm, a foolish, desperate attempt to regain control. His hand, sweaty and soft, barely brushed Vinny's tailored sleeve. It was a gesture of aggression that lacked any true conviction. Vinny moved then, a movement so subtle it was almost imperceptible. His shoulder barely shifted, but it was enough. Marcus's hand, instead of gripping, slid off, leaving him momentarily off balance, his face momentarily losing its bluster and revealing a flicker of raw fear. The shift was enough to send a clear message: do not touch me. The air grew colder, heavier, charged with an invisible electricity. Alara watched the silent exchange, a knot of icy dread tightening in her stomach. She knew that look in Marcus's eyes, the moment bravado gave way to a dawning, terrible realization. She had seen it before in others, always just before the hammer fell. But this time the hammer was Vinny. The sheer power radiating from him was a tangible force, a silent storm brewing just beneath the surface. It made her knees weak. Marcus, however, was too far gone in his self-importance to fully retreat. He steadied himself, his voice dropping to a dangerous, albeit slightly shaky, whisper. You have no idea who you're dealing with, stranger. This club, these girls, they're all mine. I own them. He cast a possessive, leering glance at Alara, as if to prove his point. His words were a physical violation, making Alara's skin crawl. The possessive declaration hung in the air, a foul taste in Alara's mouth. She hugged herself, trying to make herself smaller. Disappear. The spotlight felt like a burning interrogation lamp, exposing her vulnerability for all to see. Her eyes darted from Marcus's crude face to Vinny's impassive profile. She wondered what Vinny was thinking, if he even registered Marcus's pathetic claims. She felt like an object, a piece of property, and the shame of it was a bitter pill. Vinny finally shifted his gaze. His eyes, dark and unreadable, slowly detached from Alara and settled on Marcus. It was a deliberate, almost dismissive movement, as if he were finally deigning to acknowledge an irritating fly. The weight of his stare was immense, capable of crushing. Marcus visibly flinched, his bluster draining from him like water from a sieve. His cheeks, flushed with anger moments before, now paled. The change in Marcus was immediate and stark. The anger in his eyes was replaced by a dawning terror, a recognition of something primal and unyielding in Vinny's gaze. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. His bluster had been a shield, a performance, and Vinny had effortlessly seen through it, shattering it with a single look. The smell of fear, now undeniably Marcus's own, began to permeate the air. Vinny took a slow, deliberate step forward, closing the small distance between them. Marcus instinctively recoiled, taking a step back, his foot bumping against the unconscious customer still sprawled on the floor. The club remained utterly silent, the tension so thick it felt as though it could be cut with a knife. The air around Vinny felt heavier, charged with an unspoken threat. Alara watched, mesmerized and horrified. She saw the fear in Marcus's eyes, a fear that mirrored her own, yet was entirely different. Her fear was of pain and continued exploitation. Marcus's fear was of losing control, of facing a power far greater than his own, a force that could obliterate him without a second thought. She shivered, feeling a strange sense of vindication, even as her body protested the intense drama. Vinny leaned in slightly, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that cut through the silence like a razor. It was not loud, but it carried an undeniable authority, vibrating through the very floorboards of the Onyx Club. Every single person in the room heard it, clear as a bell. What's her price? A profound, suffocating silence descended upon the Onyx Club. Vinny's low voice, cutting through the prior chaos, had extinguished every last murmur, every clinking glass, every distant note of music. The very air thickened, growing heavy with unspoken questions and raw, sudden fear. Marcus Thorne stood frozen, his jaw slack, the color draining from his face as if struck by a ghost. His eyes, usually shifty and calculating, darted wildly between Vinny's unwavering stare and Alara's trembling form. The implications of Vinny's direct question, uttered with such cold, absolute authority, reverberated through the stunned room. It was not a question of negotiation, but of immediate, unyielding demand. Alara felt her breath catch in her throat, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. She stared at Vinny, her emerald eyes white and disbelieving, her mind reeling through a dizzying kaleidoscope of emotions. The rough grip of the customer's hand still seemed to burn on her arm, a phantom pain. Now Vinny's words, "What's her price?" echoed in the sudden quiet, sharp, and transactional. Was this salvation or merely a different form of capture? Her freedom had always been a distant dream, an impossible luxury. Now it hung in the balance, reduced to a cold number, a sum of money. The thought was both horrifying and strangely, terrifyingly hopeful. A single bead of sweat trickled down Marcus's temple, catching the dim club lights. He licked his dry lips, his mind racing, a frantic hamster on a wheel. He knew who Vinny Moretti was, or at least he knew enough. The name alone carried a weight that could crush lesser men, and Marcus was certainly a lesser man. The stories whispered in the city's shadows painted a grim picture of Moretti's reach, his unwavering resolve, and the swift, brutal consequences for those who crossed him. Fear warred with a sudden, audacious glimmer of greed. This man, Moretti, had just intervened. He had protected the girl, and now he wanted her. Marcus saw an opportunity, a chance to extract a fortune from his unexpected predicament. He could name a sum so outrageous, so impossible that even Vinny Moretti would flinch. Alara watched Vinny, trying to decipher the unreadable depths of his dark eyes. There was no pity there, no soft emotion, only a stark, focused intensity that made her shiver. She was a commodity, she realized, a piece of property in a cruel transaction. Yet, a strange, undeniable flicker of gratitude ignited within her. He had stopped the man who tried to grab her. He had silenced the club. He had, in his own terrifying way, defended her. Her body still thrummed with residual fear from the earlier assault, but a new, more profound dread began to settle in her bones. What kind of man bought a person? What did he expect in return? The air was thick with the scent of stale whiskey and the metallic tang of unspoken fear. Marcus finally found his voice, a pathetic croak at first, then a forced, shaky bluster. He cleared his throat, trying to regain some semblance of his usual authority, but his hands trembled imperceptibly. He squared his shoulders, a futile gesture against the invisible pressure radiating from Vinny. "Her price?" he repeated, buying time, his gaze still avoiding Vinny's. "Well, Mr. Moretti, Alara is a special talent. Very special." He glanced at Alara, a possessive, calculating look in his eyes that made her skin crawl. Her training, her upkeep, the investments I've made in her career, it's substantial. He was spinning a web of lies, inflating imaginary expenses, trying to justify the astronomical figure already forming in his mind. Vinny did not move. He did not speak. He simply stood, a dark, immovable silhouette against the glittering backdrop of the club, his eyes like two chips of obsidian fixed on Marcus. His silence was more intimidating than any shouted threat, a suffocating presence that squeezed the air from Marcus's lungs. Alara felt a peculiar calm amidst her terror, a strange sense of detachment. She was an observer in her own life, a pawn in a game she barely understood. The cold stage floor beneath her bare feet felt like solid ground in the swirling chaos. "Her debt alone," Marcus stammered, now fully committing to his audacious scheme, "is immense. Thousands, Mr. Moretti. Thousands upon thousands. Not to mention the future earnings she represents, her exclusivity, her unique appeal." He paused, taking a shallow breath, gauging Vinny's reaction. There was none. The man remained impassive, a stone statue of power. Marcus took it as an invitation, a sign that perhaps this wealthy boss was truly desperate, truly willing to pay any cost. He imagined Vinny's pockets were deep, bottomless even. He would bleed him dry. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. She knew the exact figure of her debt, every fabricated penny Marcus had piled onto her. It was a crushing burden, a number that had haunted her dreams and stripped her of her hope. But Marcus was clearly fabricating a new, impossible sum. Her hands instinctively went to the small, worn locket hidden beneath her costume, the only tangible link to a life that had once been hers. She felt a profound sense of helplessness, a familiar despair washing over her. She was not a person to them, just a transaction, a business deal. The harsh artificial light of the club seemed to magnify her vulnerability. And then there's the inconvenience, Marcus continued, growing bolder, his voice gaining a false bravado. The trouble you have caused tonight, Mr. Moretti, a scene in my establishment. Reputations are delicate things, you understand. He even managed a weak, ingratiating smile, a pathetic attempt to regain some control over the terrifying man before him. He was fishing, casting out a line, seeing how much he could reel in. His eyes, though still wary, now held a glint of avarice that momentarily overshadowed his fear. He was calculating the maximum profit from this unexpected turn of events. Vinny's gaze narrowed almost imperceptibly, a subtle shift that sent a fresh jolt of fear through Marcus. The club owner's false confidence crumbled, replaced by a renewed sense of impending doom. He realized he had pushed too far, overplayed his hand. He had misread the cold, unyielding nature of the man. The air now tasted metallic, like copper, a prelude to something sharp and definitive. Alara felt a tremor run through her body, a premonition of the finality to come. She braced herself, her knuckles white as she clasped her hands together. So, what is the number, Marcus? Vinny's voice was still low, but now it held an edge of impatience, a barely contained steel that threatened to snap. He used Marcus's first name, an act of dominance that stripped away any pretense of equality between them. It was a statement, a reminder of who held all the power in this frozen tableau. The question hung in the air, a final ultimatum, demanding an immediate answer. The pressure in the room became almost unbearable, pressing down on everyone present. Marcus swallowed hard, his throat dry, his calculations spiraling wildly. He had aimed for a sum that would deter, but Vinny's demeanor suggested he would pay whatever was demanded. He could make a fortune, enough to erase his own pressing debts, enough to live comfortably for years. His fear of Moretti was still present, a cold dread in his belly, but the lure of unimaginable wealth began to overpower it. He pictured the cash, crisp and green, overflowing his coffers. He felt a desperate urge to seize this opportunity, however dangerous it seemed. 50,000, Marcus blurted out, the words tumbling from his mouth before he could second-guess himself. He braced for an argument, a challenge, a fierce negotiation. He expected Vinny to laugh in his face, to dismiss the sum as absurd, but Vinny simply stared, his expression unchanging, unwavering. 50,000 was a staggering amount for a dancer's debt, a number Marcus had pulled from the depths of his greed, hoping it would be enough to scare Vinny off, or at least make him pause. It was an almost impossible sum in the squalid reality of the Onyx Club, a king's ransom for a young woman who was little more than a slave. Alara gasped, a small, involuntary sound that was lost in the absolute stillness. 50,000, the number was monstrous, an inconceivable amount of money. Her eyes widened, a mixture of shock and a strange dawning despair flooding her senses. She was worth $50,000? To be bought and sold like an object, the sheer audacity of Marcus's demand left her breathless, a cold wave washing over her. She felt like a trapped bird, its wings clipped, its fate decided by forces entirely beyond its control. The weight of that number pressed down on her, heavier than any chains. Vinny's eyes remained fixed on Marcus, holding the club owner's gaze in a vice-like grip. There was no flicker of surprise, no hint of hesitation. He held Marcus's gaze for a long, drawn-out moment, a silent assertion of power that made Marcus's skin prickle. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, Vinny reached inside the breast pocket of his impeccably tailored suit jacket. The rustle of fabric was amplified in the hushed silence, every small sound echoing through the suddenly cavernous club. Alara watched, mesmerized, her heart thumping in erratic rhythm against her ribs. He produced a thick wad of cash, bound tightly with a heavy rubber band. It was a formidable stack of $100 bills, crisp and new, smelling faintly of ink and paper. The sight of it made Marcus's breath hitch, his eyes widening in naked, uncontrollable greed. All fear seemed to vanish from his face, replaced by a desperate, hungry gleam. This was real. This was happening. Vinnie Moretti was not bluffing. He was going to pay. The scent of money, more potent than any perfume or stale alcohol, filled the immediate vicinity. With an almost unnerving calm, Vinnie began to peel off the rubber band. Each movement was precise, economical, practiced. He started counting the bills, his fingers moving with an effortless grace that belied the immense sum in his hands. He did not rush. He did not falter. Each bill was separated, counted, and added to a growing pile, his lips moving silently with the tally. The rhythmic rustle of the cash was the only sound in the club, a steady, hypnotic pulse that held everyone captive. Alara watched his hands, the elegant, powerful fingers that handled the money with such ease. She noticed the small, barely visible scar above his left eyebrow, a faint line that hinted at a past far removed from her own. Her gaze flickered to the stack of bills, then back to Vinnie's face. He was not looking at her. He was not looking at the money. His dark, piercing eyes were still locked on Marcus, a silent challenge, an unbreakable bond of transaction that connected the two men. It was a terrifying, mesmerizing display of absolute, unshakable control. Marcus stood transfixed, his eyes glued to the unfolding spectacle, his mouth slightly agape. He could not believe it. $50,000. It was more money than he had ever seen in one place, more than he had ever hoped to extract from Alara. His entire body thrummed with a greedy excitement that almost overshadowed his lingering fear of Vinnie. He watched each bill, meticulously counted, as if his very future depended on each one. He could feel the weight of it, the power it represented, even before it was truly his. The air crackled with anticipation, a strange tension that mixed fear with avarice. Vinnie finished his count, the pile of bills now neatly stacked in his left hand. Without a word, without a change in his impassive expression, he extended his arm and placed the entire wad of cash onto the bar counter, directly in front of a dumbfounded Marcus. The crisp, green stack landed with a soft thud, a sound that seemed to reverberate through the profound silence of the Onyx Club. His gaze never left Marcus's face, a silent, powerful challenge, a clear declaration of ownership. A profound, heavy silence clung to the Onyx Club, thick and suffocating, even after the crisp sound of the cash had settled on the bar. Marcus Thorne stood frozen, his mouth slightly ajar, his eyes still fixed on the money pile. He seemed unable to breathe, his bluster completely drained from him. The patrons who had witnessed the sudden, chilling transaction remained unnaturally still in their seats. Every clink of glass had ceased. Every murmur had died. The air itself felt brittle, as if a single loud breath might shatter the fragile calm. Vinnie Moretti, his posture as unyielding as carved stone, did not spare Marcus another glance. His dark eyes, which had held the club owner captive moments before, now shifted. They found Alara, standing near the stage, her body still trembling, her emerald eyes wid with a mixture of terror and utter bewilderment. He made no sound. He simply raised his hand, a slow, deliberate gesture, beckoning her to follow. It was not a request. It was an expectation, a command delivered without a single spoken word. Alara's mind still swam in a dizzying fog. The world felt like a distorted dream, every sound muffled, every light too bright or too dim. Her legs moved on their own, guided by an instinct she did not fully understand. Her feet, still accustomed to the stage, now carried her away from it. She walked past the spot where the boorish customer had crumpled, a faint groan still escaping his lips. She avoided looking at him, just as she avoided looking at the shocked faces of the other dancers and the frozen patrons. Their stares felt like cold hands on her skin, but she could not stop. She could only follow the silent man who had just bought her. Her worn stage dress, which had felt like a second skin during her performance, now felt alien and exposed. Each step felt heavy, burdened by the unspoken questions swirling in her head. She clutched the tiny tarnished locket beneath her dress, her fingers finding its familiar shape. It was her only connection to a life that now seemed impossibly far away. The club's stale scent of cheap perfume and stale cigarettes began to fade, replaced by the faint, crisp scent of the night air as she approached the exit. She noticed the slight chill on her bare arms. It felt both jarring and strangely cleansing. As she moved through the club's entrance, two large, silent men in dark suits stepped forward. They were Vinny's men, she realized. They moved with a quiet efficiency, their presence a solid wall between her and the stunned world inside. They did not touch her, but their unspoken message was clear. She was under their protection, or perhaps their custody. The thought sent a fresh shiver down her spine. The outside world was a blur of neon signs and passing traffic, a stark contrast to the oppressive velvet and dim lights of the Onyx Club. The crisp night air filled her lungs, a deep, unfamiliar breath. A sleek black car, almost invisible against the shadowed street, waited at the curb. Its polished surface gleamed under the distant streetlights. One of the men opened the rear door, revealing an interior that was a world away from the grimy club. The seats were upholstered in soft, dark leather, so deep and inviting. The air inside was cool, fresh, faintly scented, with something clean and expensive, utterly devoid of the lingering odors she had endured for years. It felt like stepping into another dimension, an abrupt and jarring shift from the familiar squalor of her existence. Alara hesitated for a fractional moment. Her eyes flickered towards Vinny, who stood by the car, his expression unreadable in the dim light. He made no further gesture, offered no words. He simply waited, a dark, imposing figure of quiet authority. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. The choice, if it had ever been hers, felt long gone. She bent and slid into the plush comfort of the back seat. The leather felt cool against her skin, a sensation she had not experienced in a very long time. Vinny followed, settling into the seat beside her. The door closed with a soft, solid thud, sealing them off from the city's night sounds. It created a cocoon of silence, broken only by the low hum of the engine as the car began to move. The driver, another one of Vinny's silent men, expertly navigated the vehicle away from the curb and into the flow of traffic. Alara pressed herself back against the seat, feeling its luxurious give, a sensation that was both comforting and unsettling. She risked a glance at Vinny. He sat perfectly still, his gaze directed forward, seemingly observing nothing, yet aware of everything. His profile was sharp, etched against the passing city lights. He exuded an aura of contained power, a quiet intensity that made her heart pound a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She could not decipher his intentions. She could not even guess what might be passing through his mind. He was an enigma, a man who had intervened in her life with a single, brutal question and a pile of cash, changing everything in a matter of minutes. The city lights, once a distant haze through the club's windows, now rushed past them, streaks of red and white and yellow against the dark sky. They blurred into indistinct smudges, reflecting Alara's own fragmented thoughts. She pressed her hand to the cool glass of the window, watching the world outside rush by. The Onyx Club, a place that had been her prison and her stage for so long, became a distant speck in the rearview mirror, then vanished entirely. A profound sense of unreality washed over her, chilling her to the bone. Was she truly free? The word felt hollow on her tongue, an unfamiliar taste. Freedom had always been a distant, impossible dream, a whisper she dared not voice. Now it felt handed to her, bought like a commodity, and that made it feel tainted, incomplete. The car, with its silent occupants and luxurious interior, did not feel like a vehicle of liberation. It felt like a cage, albeit a far more comfortable one than she had known. Her mind raced, grappling with the sudden shift in her circumstances. The years of debt, of Marcus Thorne's cruel remarks, of the desperate need to simply survive, had defined her. Now all of it was gone, swept away by a man she barely knew. Her fingers tightened around her locket again. It was the only constant in her suddenly upended world. She longed for a moment of quiet, a chance to process the whirlwind of emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. Fear still coiled in her stomach, a familiar companion, but it was now mixed with a strange, nascent sense of relief. The constant pressure of Marcus's threats, the crushing weight of her debt, the insidious dread of being sold to someone worse, All of that had evaporated, replaced by a new, terrifying uncertainty. The silence in the car was absolute, broken only by the soft hum of the engine. She felt the weight of Vinny's presence beside her, a heavy, unspoken question. What did he want from her? Was she simply an acquisition, a trophy? Or was there something else, something she could not yet grasp? Her eyes darted around the luxurious interior, taking in the small, discreet details. The subtle stitching on the leather, the polished wood trim, the faint glow of a digital clock set into the dashboard. It was a world entirely foreign to her. She had nowhere to go. She had no family left, no friends to turn to, no home beyond the dingy room above the Onyx Club. Her entire existence had been tied to that place, to the stage, to the constant struggle against the debt. Now she was adrift, untethered. The thought was both terrifying and strangely exhilarating. The fear of the unknown was immense, but it was not the same crushing, hopeless fear she had known with Marcus. This fear had an edge of anticipation, a fragile thread of possibility. The car continued its smooth, effortless journey through the city streets. The urban landscape gradually gave way to wider roads, then to less populated areas. The blur of neon signs was replaced by the softer glow of distant streetlights in the dark, looming shapes of trees. She wondered if they were leaving the city entirely, venturing into a place she had never seen. The possibilities, both wonderful and terrifying, spun through her mind. Every moment was a step into the unknown. Her heart fluttered like a trapped bird. She still felt the phantom ache of the customer's grip on her arm, the remembered terror of his leering face. Vinny had intervened, swift and brutal. He had protected her, but she did not understand why. Was it a whim? A display of power? Or did he see something in her? Something that resonated with his own mysterious code? She had seen the raw, uncompromising authority in his eyes, the cold indifference he held for Marcus Thorne. She knew he was a man who acted with purpose, never without reason. The smooth ride, the quiet dignity of the car, felt like a dream. She pinched her arm, a small, secret gesture to ensure she was awake. The slight pain grounded her, pulled her back to the reality of the soft leather seat, the cool glass, the silent man beside her. She was not dreaming. This was real. Her life had irrevocably changed in one dizzying, terrifying night. The weight of that realization settled upon her, heavy and profound. The city lights continued to blur outside the tinted windows, a kaleidoscope of indistinct colors and shapes. Each passing street, each shadowed building, offered no clue to their destination. Alara watched them fade into the distance, one by one, until the urban glow was nothing more than a faint shimmer on the horizon. A deep, unsettling realization bloomed within her. She had no idea where she was going. She had no idea what her future held with this silent, powerful man who had bought her freedom and taken her into his unknown world. The sleek black car, a silent predator on wheels, glided effortlessly through the tall, ornate gates. Iron scrolled into intricate patterns, closing off the city's distant, restless hum. Alara watched the massive stone walls rise, imposing and silent, like ancient sentinels guarding a world she could only imagine. Her reflection, a pale, almost translucent ghost, shimmered against the tinted glass. She hardly recognized the lost girl staring back, a phantom who seemed utterly out of place in this sudden, profound quiet. The air itself felt different here, crisp and clean, purged of the stale smoke and the gnawing desperation that had clung to her skin for what felt like forever. When the car stopped, the silence amplified. She stepped onto a gravel path, each tiny stone crunching sharply under her worn shoes, the sound shockingly loud in the vast stillness. Her eyes traveled upwards, tracing the sprawling, dark silhouette of the Moretti estate against the fading twilight sky. It was less a house and more a formidable presence. The structure was a fortress of ancient stone and dark, heavy wood, breathing centuries of untold stories. A liveried man, his movements as silent and precise as Vinny's own, appeared at a massive, heavy oak door. It swung open without a sound, revealing a cavernous entryway. The air inside carried the distinct scent of polished mahogany, old leather, and a fragrance Alara could only define as old money. It was utterly foreign, a rich, complex aroma that hit her with the force of an unfamiliar language. Her eyes struggled to adjust to the dim, opulent interior, where deep shadows danced across intricate tapestries hanging from the walls and gleamed on marble floors. Every soft whisper of her worn dress, a garment that now felt coarse and out of place, seemed amplified in the vast, echoing hall. She tucked her hands close to her sides, feeling impossibly small, a tiny smudge of desperation in a painting of profound wealth. Vinny stood near a sweeping, curved staircase. His posture relaxed, yet his gaze was watchful, his dark eyes meeting hers with an unreadable depth that held no welcome. He offered no words, no explanation for why she was here, only a subtle tilt of his head, a gesture towards the grand stairs. The silence between them stretched, thick and heavy, laden with unspoken questions that pulsed in the air. A cold tension lingered from the club, a ghost of the chaos she had just escaped. Alara's fingers instinctively closed around the small, worn locket hidden beneath her dress. Its familiar cool weight, the only real thing in this sudden, bewildering dream. Was this freedom, a liberation from her torment? Or had she simply exchanged one cage for another, meticulously crafted from gold and velvet, perhaps even more beautiful but no less confining? Her heart hammered a frantic, desperate rhythm against her ribs, a wild bird trapped. A different woman, older with kind but unyielding eyes, approached her then. She wore a simple dark uniform that spoke of quiet authority. The woman's voice was soft, a soothing murmur as she led Alara up the winding stairs, their polished wood gleaming under hidden lights. She offered a selection of fresh clothes, clean and untouched, in the promise of a warm, deep bath. Alara followed her, each step a hesitant echo, her mind a whirlwind of confusion. Yet a strange, fragile hope, like a tiny bird with broken wings, fluttered within her chest. The woman paused before a heavy wooden door, its surface smooth and dark, and pushed it open with a gentle hand. "This will be your room, Alara," she explained, her voice a soft, almost reverent whisper. It was a space larger than her entire apartment had ever been, with impossibly high ceilings and tall, arched windows that overlooked manicured gardens, serene under the rising moon. Soft lamplight glowed from a bedside table, illuminating a plush, cream-colored carpet and a vast bed covered in shimmering silk, beckoning her closer. The woman left, pulling the heavy door shut with a soft, final click. Alara was finally truly alone. She stood in the center of the vast room, her shoulders still hunched, a phantom reflex from years of bracing for a sudden blow, a harsh word. The silence was absolute, a profound quiet that pressed in on her ears, a physical weight after years of constant, grating noise. The endless thrum of the city, the raucous laughter from the club, the sharp jingle of coins, all vanished. She moved slowly toward the bed, her fingers trembling slightly as they traced the smooth, cool silk covering. It felt impossibly luxurious, a stark, almost painful contrast to the rough, thin sheets she had known her entire life. Her old clothes, still clinging to the stale air of the Onyx Club, to the smell of cheap perfume and desperation, suddenly felt heavy and unclean. A wave of revulsion washed over her. She peeled them off, letting them fall in a crumpled heap on the plush carpet, and then stepped into the steaming water of the oversized, claw-footed tub. The hot water embraced her, a comforting warmth that seeped into her aching muscles, washing away the grit of the night and the lingering phantom touches of leering patrons. She submerged herself completely, scrubbing her skin until it was pink and raw, as if she could physically erase the memory of the past hours, the past years, from her very being. The water turned a faint, murky gray around her, a tangible representation of the grime she shed. Yet even as the soothing warmth enveloped her body, a deep, unsettling chill remained stubbornly inside her, lodged somewhere near her heart. Why had he done this? This powerful man, Vinny Moretti. She was a stranger, a mere dancer from a seedy, forgotten club, an insignificant pawn in a brutal game. What could he possibly want from her that he would go to such lengths? The question gnawed at her, a relentless echo in the sudden, overwhelming quiet of her mind. Trust was a rare and perilous luxury she could never afford, a word that felt alien, a concept spoken in a language she had long forgotten how to understand. Later, wrapped in a cloud-soft, pristine white robe, Alara began to slowly explore the room. Every object, every carefully placed piece of furniture, spoke of immense wealth and meticulous, almost obsessive care. A small, ornate dressing table stood against one wall, holding an untouched array of expensive cosmetics in glass jars and gleaming compacts. When she opened the wardrobe, its heavy doors gliding silently, it revealed neatly folded clothes in muted, elegant colors, soft grays, deep blues, creamy whites. They were simple in their cut, yet exquisitely tailored, clearly chosen for her with a strange, almost unsettling precision. She reached out, her fingers picking up a silk scarf, feeling its cool, fluid slide between her fingertips. He had thought of everything, anticipated her every unspoken need, yet he remained an absolute enigma. His generosity, this overwhelming act of rescue, felt less like true kindness and more like a carefully executed transaction. Another payment in a debt she did not understand and could not fathom how to repay. She walked slowly to the tall window, her bare feet silent on the thick carpet, and pushed aside the heavy velvet drapes. They were a deep, rich midnight blue, parting with a hushed rustle. Outside, the night was utterly still, the sprawling garden bathed in the pale, ethereal glow of the moon. Ancient trees stood like dark, silent sentinels, their branches reaching towards the sky, and beyond them, only deeper, impenetrable shadows. There were no city lights in the distance, no familiar, comforting rumble of traffic, no promise of escape down a well-worn, familiar street. Her reflection looked back at her from the glass, a phantom in the moonlit pane, her eyes wide and still haunted by the recent past. She was safe, yes, from the immediate, tangible threat of Marcus Thorne and his grasping, predatory hands. Safe from the leers and the whispered threats, safe from the crushing, suffocating weight of her insurmountable debt. But safety, she knew from bitter experience, often came with its own steep price, its own insidious form of confinement. Alara began to pace the room, her bare feet sinking slightly into the thick carpet, her movements restless. Her mind raced, sifting through every interaction, every fleeting glance Vinny had given her, trying to piece together the fragments of his motive. There had been no warmth in his dark eyes, no flicker of pity or kindness, only a cold, almost surgical, sitting intelligence that seemed to strip her bare. He had paid a king's ransom, an unimaginable sum, to pull her from one kind of desperate servitude. Was this an act of true benevolence? A selfless rescue? Or was it merely a transfer of ownership, a shift from one master to another, albeit a far more powerful one? Her years in the club had etched a painful truth into her soul. Nothing was ever truly free. Every perceived kindness carried an unspoken expectation. Every grand rescue a hidden, often devastating, cost. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling the small, worn locket hidden beneath her soft robe, its familiar shape a solid anchor. It was the only true thing she still possessed, the last remnant of a life that felt a million miles away. Her gaze fell on the heavy, elaborate drapes at the window once more, drawn to their luxurious weight. She reached out, her fingers closing around the cold, impossibly smooth silk fabric. It felt cool and foreign against her skin. She pulled it taut, testing its resilience, feeling the sheer weight of the material in her hands. The window itself was large, a vast expanse of glass, yet it offered no real expansive view of the outside world beyond the meticulously manicured estate grounds. She had spent so many endless nights yearning for freedom, dreaming of a life without chains, without the suffocating, constant fear of unpaid debts that had shadowed her every step. Now she was surrounded by opulence, protected by powerful ancient walls, yet the feeling of being trapped persisted, a subtle, insidious whisper in the deepest corners of her mind. The crude, visible bars were gone, yes, but they had been replaced by an even more beautiful, more deceptive, gilded cage. The air in the room, once so clean, now felt heavy with unspoken promises and unspoken threats. The velvet drapes offered Alara no comfort. She traced their patterns for hours, seeing only the bars of a different kind of cage. The vast, silent room at the Moretti estate felt like a luxurious prison, gilded walls replacing grim ones. Every plush rug and antique lamp spoke of a debt, a new ownership. Her stomach clenched with dread. She was safe, but at what cost? What did Vinnie Moretti truly want from her? The question gnawed at her, a relentless current beneath the placid surface of her new surroundings. Sleep had refused her. Her body, used to the club's late hours and constant movement, felt alien in the deep quiet. She missed the distant music, the clinking glasses, even the stale scent of smoke. At least those were familiar horrors. This new reality felt like a mirage, too beautiful to be harmless. She walked to the large window, peering into the pre-dawn gloom. Trees stood like silent sentinels, their dark branches reaching into the empty sky. No city lights shone here. No signs of life beyond the estate's unseen boundaries. The isolation smothered any nascent hope. A soft knock startled her. Her heart hammered against her ribs. A frantic bird. She smoothed her borrowed nightgown, feeling exposed. A deep breath did little to calm her nerves. "Come in," she whispered. The door opened slowly, revealing Frank, Vinny's aide. His presence was quiet, his movements efficient, his expression unreadable. He carried a tray with a small pot of tea, a single cup, and delicate pastries. "Mr. Moretti thought you might be hungry," Frank said, his voice low and even. He set the tray on a small table near the chaise lounge. The porcelain clinked loudly in the quiet room. Alara watched him, her emerald eyes wary. She had not eaten since her last performance, but food felt distant. "Thank you," she managed, her throat tight. She gripped her hands, a nervous habit. Frank straightened, his gaze briefly meeting hers with quiet observation. "Mr. Moretti also asked me to convey some information," Frank continued, his hands clasped loosely. He wasted no words. Alara felt a fresh wave of fear. This was it, the explanation for her sudden change. She braced herself, her spine stiffening. "It concerns your situation at the Onyx Club and the true extent of your debt." He paused. Alara swallowed hard, her mouth suddenly dry. Marcus Thorne, Frank began, his tone academic, had accumulated significant debts to various individuals, among them a man known as Silas Volkov. The name hit Alara like a physical blow. She had heard it whispered in the club, always accompanied by a shudder, a quick sign of the cross. Volkov. The name evoked shadows and cruelty, a power far beyond Marcus Thorne's petty tyranny. Her breath hitched, a cold knot forming in her stomach. "Volkov is a man of considerable influence," Frank continued, "and an unforgiving nature." He picked up the teapot, pouring fragrant amber liquid into the cup. Marcus owed Volkov a substantial sum, a sum he was rapidly becoming unable to repay. Alara's mind raced, piecing together fragments of overheard conversations. She remembered Marcus pacing backstage, flushed, muttering about hungry wolves. "Volkov," Frank said, handing her the tea, "does not accept cash repayment when a more interesting form of collateral presents itself." Alara's hand trembled as she took the cup, its warmth a stark contrast to the icy dread spreading through her veins. "Collateral," she whispered, the word tasting like ash. She knew what he meant, but her mind recoiled from the horrifying implications. Frank's dark, steady eyes met hers. "Marcus had, on several occasions, spoken of your value to Volkov's men. He had described your unique talents, your allure." Alara felt a wave of nausea. Her performances, once a source of fragile pride, now felt like a grotesque exhibition. "Volkov's interest was piqued," Frank stated. "He decided that you, Alara, would serve as suitable repayment for Marcus Thorne's outstanding debt. Not for a brief period, not for a few performances, but permanently." The word echoed a death knell. Permanently. Her stomach churned. Marcus's urgent threat to sell her debt to someone far worse had been a chilling truth. Marcus was stalling, trying to find another way out, Frank explained. But Volkov's patience was at an end. He made it clear that if Marcus could not produce the payment, or you, by the end of the week, the consequences for him would be severe. And for her, the unspoken hung thick in the air. Alara's vision blurred as tears welled. The end of the week, days away. Vinnie Moretti's purchase the night she was pulled from the stage had been just hours before that deadline. She had been teetering on the precipice of an unimaginable nightmare. "Volkov's reputation precedes him," Frank continued, his voice softer, almost a warning. "He deals in things darker than gambling debts. He controls a network that preys on the vulnerable, particularly young women. Elara shuddered. She gripped the teacup, knuckles white. Her mind flashed to hushed conversations, quick glances among the girls in the dressing room, whispers of girls who disappeared, of payments that never ended. She had dismissed them as rumors. Now she knew they were grim realities. Frank looked directly at her. Mr. Moretti became aware of this situation. He understood that Marcus Thorne was using you as a pawn, an unwilling sacrifice. He paused. Alara's breath caught. She remembered Vinny's piercing gaze from his secluded booth, his intense watchfulness. She had thought it was just another customer, but he had seen her fear, her desperation, her impending doom. When that customer accosted you on stage, Frank went on, it simply accelerated Mr. Moretti's timetable. He knew that if he did not act immediately, you would be lost to Volkov. Alara's memory replayed the scene. The drunken man's grasping hand, the terror, the feeling of being pulled into a void. Then Vinny, a blur of decisive motion, his grip like iron, his presence radiating cold calm. She had been too stunned to process it then, too consumed by shock. Now the pieces clicked into place, a mosaic of horror and salvation. The price Vinny had asked Marcus for was not for a dancer. It was the price to sever Marcus's claim, to preempt Volkov's monstrous demand. It was the death of a life. Tears streamed down her face, silent and hot, tracing paths through her faint stage makeup. She hadn't realized she was weeping. It was not despair, but profound terror for what she had narrowly escaped. Volkov, a faceless monster, loomed in her mind, a shadow from which she had been plucked just in time. Frank watched her, his expression neutral, but his eyes held a flicker of understanding. Mr. Moretti acted as he did to prevent a graver outcome, he said, his voice softer. He bought you from Marcus Thorne to keep you from Silas Volkov. That is the truth of your situation. The cold, stark, brutal truth. Her body trembled, a deep shiver running through her. She felt hollowed out, yet filled with a fragile, dawning realization. Her gilded cage no longer felt like a cage. It felt like a fortress. The opulence, once a symbol of captivity, now represented an impenetrable shield. The silence, once unnerving, now felt like a comforting embrace, keeping the horrors of the outside world at bay. Vinny Moretti, the man she had viewed with deep suspicion, whose transactional words had cut her, was suddenly transformed. He was not just a buyer, he was a barrier. He was the wall between her and a fate worse than death. Alara wiped her eyes, trying to compose herself. Her breathing was ragged, but shock gave way to a different, complex emotion. And now, she asked, her voice trembling but firm, what happens now? Frank remained impassive. For now, you are safe here, Alara. Mr. Moretti ensures the safety of those under his protection. The word protection resonated deep within her. It felt like a promise. Frank gave a slight nod. Mr. Moretti will speak with you when he deems it appropriate. For now, rest. You are secure. He exited as quietly as he had entered, leaving Alara alone. But the solitude was no longer stifling. It was a space for reflection. She sat on the chaise lounge, the untouched tea growing cold. Her mind replayed every interaction with Marcus, every hurried whisper she had dismissed. She remembered a night Marcus, drunk, joked, "She's got eyes that could melt ice, a real prize." Volkov himself took notice. She had brushed it off as crude flattery. Now the words echoed with sinister clarity. Another memory surfaced, a hulking, scarred man who had appeared at the club weeks prior. He sat in a dark corner, his eyes never leaving the stage. Marcus had been unusually deferential, almost cowering. Alara had felt an instinctual chill then, her movements faltering. She had attributed it to his menacing appearance. But he had been one of Volkov's enforcers, assessing the collateral. She had been on display, evaluated like livestock, her fate sealed without her knowledge. The thought made her skin crawl. A shiver ran down her spine, not from cold, but from vivid images. She saw herself, not dancing under the spotlight, but trapped in a dark, nameless place, stripped of dignity. The darkness, always an abstract concept, was suddenly sharp, tangible, breathing down her neck. She had been so close to that abyss. And then Vinnie Moretti, the ruthless, silent man, had stepped in. He had purchased her, not as a possession to exploit, but as a life to save. The realization hit her with the force of a tidal wave, washing away her fear of him, replacing it with terror and overwhelming relief. Her perception of Vinny shifted dramatically. The cold, analytical glint in his dark eyes, once predatory, now seemed a sign of fierce resolve. His unyielding demeanor, once intimidating, now felt like an impenetrable shield. The act she found dehumanizing, his blunt question, "What's her price?" was a surgical strike, a necessary brutality to sever the bonds dragging her to a terrible fate. He had seen her, truly seen her, in peril. He had acted from a code she was only just beginning to comprehend. She pressed her palms to her temples, trying to slow the torrent of thoughts. Her past life at the Onyx Club, filled with fear and debt, seemed almost benign compared to the abyss she had skirted. Marcus Thorne's exploitation, though cruel, was familiar. Volkov's promised fate was an unknown horror, a permanent erasure of herself. Vinnie Moretti had not merely bought her freedom, he had bought her continued existence, her hope of a future. Her previous distrust, her feeling of being moved from one cage to another, dissolved like smoke. This was not a cage, this was a sanctuary forged in steel and silence. Her tears had dried, leaving faint streaks. She felt exhausted, yet a strange clarity settled over her. The fear still echoed, but it was overshadowed by something she hadn't dared to feel in years. Gratitude. A profound, aching gratitude for the man who had bought her with Kyiv in a single cutting question. He had spoken no kind words, offered no gentle touch, yet his actions had been more merciful than any fleeting kindness she had ever received. She stood and walked to the window again, looking out at the still dark landscape. The trees were clearer now, their branches distinct against the lightening sky. The first faint blush at dawn painted the horizon. She took a deep, shuddering breath, filling her lungs with the estate's clean, cool air. It was so different from the club's stale, smoke-filled air. She felt a connection to this quiet strength, this impenetrable solidity. It contrasted sharply with the flimsy existence she had always known. She thought of the worn locket, still tucked beneath her nightgown, a link to her past, a reminder of the mother she had lost. A new chapter was unfolding, one she could never have foreseen. Later, when the sun had fully risen, casting long shadows across the polished floors, Alara heard footsteps outside her door. This time, she felt no jolt of fear. A quiet knock followed, then the door opened. It was Vinnie Moretti. He stood in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the hallway light. He wore a dark, tailored suit. His dark, piercing eyes met hers across the room. He said nothing, simply regarded her with his intense, unreadable gaze. Alara felt a strange fluttering in her chest. The fear she had once felt for him still lingered, a ghost of what it had been, but it was interwoven with understanding and awe. She saw him not as a cold figure, but as a man who wielded immense power with a clear, ruthless purpose. He had been her unexpected savior, the one who had seen her despair and intervened with brutal efficiency. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken thoughts, with the weight of her newfound knowledge. He took a single step into the room, then stopped. The air crackled around them, charged with the unsaid. Laura looked at him, seeing beyond the tailored suit and piercing eyes. She saw his quiet strength, the burden of his decisions, the strange, almost paternal justice that guided him. A profound, overwhelming flicker of gratitude mingled with the last vestiges of her fear. She understood now. Her purchase had been an act of salvation, not just ownership. It was a life-saving transaction, a fierce protection that had plucked her from the very jaws of hell. The grand library at the Moretti estate held the scent of aged leather and old paper, a stark contrast to the stale smoke of the Onyx Club. Alara sat on a deep velvet armchair, a book unread in her lap, the quiet hum of the house a constant presence. Her fingers traced the worn silver of her locket, a small, familiar comfort against the new unsettling peace. The revelation of the true danger, the faceless crime lord Marcus Thorne had meant to sell her to, still echoed in her mind, a cold chill that even the warmth of the roaring fireplace could not entirely dispel. She understood now that Vinny's intervention, brutal as it felt at the time, had pulled her from a far darker abyss. Vinny entered the room, his movements silent, almost ghost-like. He carried two glasses, one filled with amber liquid, the other with clear water. He offered the water to Alara, his dark eyes unreadable, then settled into an armchair opposite her, the firelight catching the sharp lines of his face. The air shifted, heavy with unspoken questions and observations. Alara's heart gave a little jump, a nervous flutter she tried to still. She felt a strange pull to this man, a mixture of fear, respect, and a dawning, unsettling gratitude. "You understand now," Vinny stated, his voice low, a quiet rumble in the large room. It was not a question, but a statement of fact, his gaze unwavering as it met hers. Alara nodded slowly, her throat tight. She looked down at her hands, remembering the icy fear that had gripped her when Frank had laid out the truth. Marcus Thorne, for all his petty cruelty, had been merely a small fish in a much larger, more dangerous ocean. Vinny had been a force of nature, a terrifying, protective storm. "He said I was just a commodity," Ilara whispered, the words tasting bitter, "that my debt owned me." She still felt the sting of it, the dehumanization, but now it was overshadowed by the sheer horror of what Marcus had truly intended. She swallowed, trying to push away the image of herself as a pawn, a possession to be bartered away. Vinny took a slow sip of his drink, his expression unmoving, yet his eyes held a depth she had not noticed before. They were dark pools reflecting the fire and something else, something akin to understanding. "Everything has a price," Vinny finally said, his voice flat, devoid of judgment. "And everything has a value. Sometimes those are different things." He paused, looking into the flames. Marcus only saw the price. He never understood the value. Alara looked up, her emerald eyes searching his. Was he talking about her? The thought sent a shiver through her, not entirely of fear this time. She felt a strange sense of being seen, truly seen, for the first time in years, perhaps ever. She thought of her dance, the hours spent perfecting each movement, the passion that had once fueled her. Before the debt, before the Onyx Club, before Marcus. That was her value, she knew, not the numbers on a ledger, but no one had ever recognized it in the club, only the superficial display. Vinny's words, though cold and pragmatic, suggested a deeper perception, a recognition of something beyond the transactional. It was unsettling, yet profoundly comforting. "What was my value to you?" Alara asked, her voice barely audible, a fragile question hanging in the quiet air. She watched his face, searching for any flicker of emotion, any clue to the enigma that was Vincent Moretti. He turned his head slowly, his gaze meeting hers again. There was no easy answer in his eyes, only a complex tapestry of thought and experience. He looked at her not as a dancer, not as a debt, but as a person, a puzzle piece he had chosen to pick up. "To me," Vinny began, his voice taking on a slightly different cadence, a touch of introspection, "you represented a breach, a line crossed, a system out of balance." He gestured vaguely with his hand, encompassing the invisible walls of his world. "I do not tolerate chaos or needless suffering when I can prevent it, especially not when it touches what is mine." He did not elaborate on what his meant, but Alara understood. She was now under his protection, an extension of his domain, and he would not allow harm to come to what belonged to him, even if that ownership was born of a forced transaction. His words, again, were not gentle, yet they contained a strange kind of reassurance. He saw injustice, and he acted. He did not act out of altruism, perhaps, but from a deeply ingrained sense of order, a personal code that demanded correction. Ilara watched him, a quiet sense of awe beginning to replace her fear. He was not a savior in the traditional sense, but a powerful force that had redirected her path, albeit without her initial consent. "The pressures of this life," Vinny continued, his gaze drifting back to the fire, "they are constant. Decisions must be made, often without all the information and always with consequences." He spoke in generalities, yet Alara felt the weight of his words, the unseen burdens he carried. He was not complaining, merely stating a fact of his existence, a rare glimpse into the complex machinery of his world. She imagined the network of loyalties, the dangers, the ceaseless vigilance required to maintain his position. He was a king in his own silent shadow kingdom, she realized. And like any king, he bore the heavy crown of responsibility. He wasn't just pulling people from burning buildings, he was ensuring the buildings themselves didn't catch fire on his watch. He protected his own, and now, by virtue of his intervention, she was one of them. The thought was both terrifying and strangely comforting, a paradox she was slowly learning to embrace. I had a dream once, Alara found herself saying, the words escaping her before she could censor them. Vinny merely looked at her, his silent attention an invitation. To dance on a real stage, not just a club floor. To feel the music, truly feel it, without the weight of eyes that only saw my body or the calculations of a ledger. She spoke softly, her voice tinged with a long-buried sorrow. The locket felt warm in her palm, a reminder of the mother who had encouraged that dream, before illness and debt had stolen everything. She remembered her mother's hands, strong and gentle, teaching her the first steps, the joy in her eyes as Alara moved. It was a memory she rarely had allowed herself to revisit, the pain too sharp, the contrast with her present too stark. But now in this quiet, luxurious room, with the silent, powerful man across from her, the memory felt safe, almost hallowed. She looked up, and Vinny's gaze was still fixed on her, a subtle softening around his eyes that she hadn't noticed before. He was listening, truly listening, not just waiting for his turn to speak. My mother, Alara continued, her voice gaining a little strength, a tremor of vulnerability. She believed in me. She always said my dance was a piece of my soul, that it should be shared, cherished. A tear slipped down her cheek, unbidden, and she quickly wiped it away, embarrassed by the sudden display of emotion. She rarely cried anymore. The club had taught her to build walls, to save her tears for the deepest hours of the night. But now they flowed freely, a release she hadn't known she needed. Vinny said nothing, merely watched her, his presence a steady anchor in the swirling current of her emotions. He did not offer platitudes or empty comforts. His silence was a testament, a quiet acknowledgement of her pain, and Alara found that she preferred it. It was more genuine than any facile words could have been. She felt a profound sense of trust growing steadily in her chest, a fragile plant in unexpected soil. He shifted slightly in his chair, a subtle movement that drew her attention. A piece of your soul, he repeated, his voice thoughtful, almost musing. He looked at his own glass, swirling the amber liquid. Some things are not meant to be bought and sold. They are meant to be guarded. He didn't elaborate, but Alara understood. He was speaking of her dream, her passion, her essence. He recognized its sanctity, even if he did not fully understand it himself. A warmth spread through Alara, chasing away some of the chill that had lingered from the club. It was a feeling she had not experienced in years, a sense of being truly protected, not just from physical harm, but from the degradation of her spirit. Vinny, the ruthless mafia boss, was offering sanctuary not just for her body, but for her very soul. It was a revelation that shook her to her core. She looked around the library at the towering shelves of books, the rich, dark wood, the soft glow of the lamps. This place, once a gilded cage, now felt like a haven. A fortress, yes, but one built to keep dangers out, not to keep her in. The bars she had imagined were gone, replaced by a quiet, unspoken understanding. The air, once thick with the ghosts of her past fears, now felt clear, breathable. I miss it, Alara confessed, her voice barely a whisper. The stage, the music, the feeling of freedom and movement. Her hands fluttered slightly, as if remembering the dance, the way her body once flowed effortlessly through space. She closed her eyes for a moment, picturing herself under a spotlight, not for patrons, but for the sheer joy of it. The image brought a bittersweet ache to her heart, a longing she had suppressed for too long. When she opened her eyes, Vinny was still watching her. There was a flicker of something in his dark gaze, something she couldn't quite decipher, perhaps a recognition of loss, a quiet empathy for a dream deferred. He had his own burdens, his own responsibilities, his own kind of cage, she realized. Perhaps he understood the yearning for freedom, even if his expression remained largely impassive. He was a man of immense power, but also immense solitude. Freedom, Vinny echoed, the words soft on his tongue. It comes at a can always, but sometimes the cost is worth it. His eyes met hers, holding a profound depth that seemed to reach into her very being. In that look, Alara saw not just a powerful man who had bought her freedom, but a man who understood the value of things beyond currency. She saw a protector, a guardian, and an unexpected kindred spirit. She took a deep breath, the air in the library suddenly feeling lighter, filled with possibility. The fear that had been her constant companion for so long began to recede, replaced by a nascent trust, a fragile but growing hope. She was no longer just a dancer in debt, a commodity to be traded. She was a Laura Vance, a woman with a past, a dream, and now a future she hadn't dared to imagine just days before. Her eyes, still wet with unshed tears, met his across the quiet space. In their shared gaze, a silent, profound understanding passed between them. It was an unasked question, answered without a single word. She would stay. She would trust him. The subtle scent of aged leather and cigar smoke clung to the air, a constant reminder of the man who now held her fate. Ilara felt the weight of her choice, a choice made not with words, but with a silent, desperate prayer in her emerald eyes. Her gaze had met Vinny's, and in that profound stillness, an understanding had passed between them, a fragile bridge built over an abyss of fear. She had chosen to stay, to trust him, and the enormity of that decision settled deep within her bones. A soft knock interrupted the quiet. Frank, Vinny's ever-present shadow, stood at the open doorway. "Mr. Moretti would like to see you, Miss Vance." His voice was low, respectful, a stark contrast to the rough demands she had grown accustomed to. Ilara nodded, her throat suddenly dry. She smoothed the simple, dark dress she wore, a garment from the selection Vinny had provided, feeling its unfamiliar softness against her skin. Each step she took down the grand hallway echoed the tremor in her heart. The polished marble gleamed under the soft glow of sconces, reflecting her image, a woman caught between two worlds. Vinny sat in a vast, dimly lit study, the scent of burning logs mingling with the familiar aroma of his cigar. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, their spines a testament to quiet knowledge. He looked up as she entered, his dark eyes always so discerning, holding a new, almost imperceptible softness. He gestured towards a plush armchair opposite his own. "Alara," he said, his voice a low rumble, "you have thought about what we discussed." It was not a question, but a statement, an acknowledgement of the unspoken conversation that had transpired between them. She sat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, the worn locket warm beneath the fabric of her dress. Her heart fluttered, a tiny bird trapped in her chest. "Yes, Mr. Moretti," she began, her voice a little shaky, but finding strength with each word. I accept your protection." The words hung in the air, a formal declaration that sealed her new reality. It was more than an acceptance. It was a surrender, a leap of faith into an unknown, shadowed world. She felt a strange mixture of apprehension and a burgeoning sense of relief she had not realized she craved so desperately. Vinny merely nodded, a slight inclination of his head. "Good," he said, taking a slow puff from his cigar. The smoke curled upwards, dissipating into the quiet air. "Then we move forward." He placed the cigar in an ashtray, the faint click echoing in the large room. He reached for a sleek black phone on his desk. Alara watched, a sudden chill tracing its way down her spine. This was the moment, she knew, when the last remnants of her old life and the threats that clung to it would be dealt with. He pressed a single speed dial button, then brought the phone to his ear. His gaze remained on Alara, steady and unwavering, as if to reassure her or perhaps to bear witness to the gravity of what was about to unfold. "Frank," Vinny said, his voice dropping to a low, decisive tone, "the matter we discussed, the outstanding accounts tied to Marcus Thorne and anyone associated with his recent business propositions concerning Miss Vance." He paused, listening. "Handle it. Ensure there are no lingering loose ends, no whispers, no inquiries, no memories. Total finality." The words were delivered with a chilling calm, each syllable precise, measured, and utterly devoid of emotion. Alara felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. The vague, terrifying threats Marcus had uttered, the shadowy figure of the crime lord he owed, the fate she had so narrowly escaped, all coalesced into a stark, brutal clarity. She understood total finality in this world meant an end, absolute and irreversible. A shiver ran through her, not of fear for herself now, but of the raw, formidable power this man wielded, a power that could erase problems and people with a single quiet directive. The air in the study seemed to grow heavy, thick with the unspoken weight of consequences. Vinny listened for another moment, then simply said, "Understood. Report when done." He placed the phone back in its cradle, the faint click sounding like the closing of a door on a dark, dangerous chapter. He looked at Alara, a faint, almost imperceptible softening around his eyes. "It is done, Alara. You are free of them." His words were quiet, a promise delivered with absolute certainty. She believed him. The weight of years of terror, of looking over her shoulder, of the suffocating grip of debt began to lift, slowly, tentatively, like mist on a dawn. A single tear escaped her eye, tracing a path down her cheek, tasting of salt and unexpected freedom. The following days unfolded with a quiet rhythm. Alara found herself exploring the vast Moretti estate, no longer with the guarded suspicion of a captive, but with the cautious curiosity of someone discovering a new world. The meticulously manicured gardens, vibrant with the late autumn colors, offered secluded paths where she could walk for hours, the crisp air filling her lungs. The library, with its towering shelves and comforting scent of old paper, became a haven. She spent hours there, tracing her fingers along the spines of books, a luxury she had long forgotten. She observed the staff, efficient and silent, moving through the estate like ghosts. They treated her with a quiet respect, a stark contrast to the leering eyes and crude remarks of the Onyx Club. She noted the subtle layers of security, the cameras discreetly placed, the quiet men who moved like shadows through the grounds. It was a fortress, yes, but no longer a gilded cage. Instead, it felt like a cocoon, sheltering her from the harsh realities of the world outside. The silence of the estate, initially unsettling, began to feel like a comforting embrace, a profound peace she had not known in years. Her interactions with Vinich remained sparse, yet each encounter carried a profound weight. They would share a quiet dinner in the expansive dining room, the clinking of silverware the only sound. He never pried, never asked about her past, yet his presence was a constant, reassuring anchor. Sometimes he would simply watch her, his dark eyes observing, understanding. Alara found herself returning his gaze, finding not judgment or demand, but a quiet strength, a depth of character she was only beginning to fathom. One evening, as she sat by the crackling fire in the study, a book open on her lap but her mind elsewhere, Vinny entered. He settled into his usual chair, the scent of his cigar a familiar comfort. He did not speak, simply watched the flames dance. Alara felt a peculiar shift within her, a desire to communicate, not with words, but with shared presence. She found herself noticing the lines of weariness around his eyes, the almost imperceptible tension in his jaw, the quiet burden he carried. He was not just her rescuer. He was a complex man, living a life of immense responsibility and profound isolation. She had begun to dance again, tentatively at first in a small, unused studio on the estate. The movements were stiff, hesitant, but with each pirouette, each stretch, the fear and pain of the past began to loosen their grip. She found a new freedom in the motion, a raw expression of gratitude and hope. Her body, once an object of display and exploitation, became a vessel for quiet joy, a conduit for healing. The worn locket, still nestled against her skin, no longer felt like a chain of sorrow, but a touchstone to her mother, a reminder of resilience. One afternoon, Vinny found her in the studio, the faint strains of classical music drifting through the open door. She was lost in a series of graceful turns, her movements fluid and unburdened. He stood for a moment, unseen, simply observing. Alara, feeling a shift in the air, slowly turned. Their eyes met across the polished wooden floor. There were no words, no expectations, just a shared moment of quiet observation and profound understanding. A faint smile touched Vinny's lips, a rare, almost shy expression. Alara felt her own lips curve in return, a genuine, unforced smile that reached her eyes. Later that week, as dusk painted the sky in shades of bruised purple and deep orange, Ilara stood by a large window overlooking the expansive grounds. The estate, with its silent sentinels and towering walls, was no longer a symbol of confinement. It was her sanctuary, a place where she could breathe, truly breathe, for the first time in years. The danger from Marcus Thorne, from the shadowy crime lord, was gone, neutralized by Vinny's quiet power. She was safe, truly safe. Vinny joined her by the window, his presence a warm anchor beside her. He did not speak, simply stood, a silent guardian against the encroaching night. Alara turned her head slightly, her gaze meeting his. In his dark, piercing eyes, she saw not ownership, but a quiet acceptance, a profound understanding of her journey. She saw a reflection of a future she had never dared to imagine, a future where safety, even in the shadows, had its own unique, powerful kind of freedom. She took a deep breath, the scent of pine and crisp air filling her lungs, and a quiet strength settled within her. This was her new life, a complex tapestry woven with threads of peril and profound protection, and she was ready to embrace it. What would you have done? One line in the comments. Let's argue it out together. Where did the story catch you? Which scene made you stop and think? A small like is a small move, but it's a big support for this channel. See you in the next story. Subscribe so you don't miss it.